What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another Talkin TV Top 10. So like most people in the world, last Thursday I turned on HBO Max in order to watch Zack Snyder's 4-hour-long cut of Justice League. While my feelings on the movie are mixed to say the least, I think the one thing that myself and a lot of other people can safely admit is that this version certainly felt more complete. I think the biggest piece of shocking material is that I personally did not hate the version of Justice League we got in theaters back in November of 2017. Granted, that was before it was popular to hate Joss Whedon, and considering that DC seemed to be trying so hard to rip off Marvel at that point, I was just kind of happy that we kind of got the DC version of the first Avengers movie. Something light and poppy that didn't really take itself so seriously. But not everyone else. No. We had to get the original Snyder masterpiece. People, did you watch Batman vs. Superman? But alas, Warner Brothers finally caved to the fan pressure, and understanding that this would be a game-changing piece of IP to add to their very burgeoning HBO Max app, they officially greenlight the Snyder Cut. And now it's officially here. We've all watched it, and I must begrudgingly admit it was a better version than the one we got in theaters. But why? I had to know. I couldn't just blindly go along with the fan base that has propped up this movie for the last 5 years now. Not just because of the typical online discourse. My brain was spinning. What is it? What was it that justified this movie specifically amongst all the different various superhero content that we have gotten in the last 5 years alone? Forget the last 10 years in which Marvel has predominantly dominated. Why this movie? What is it that truly separates this from other director's cuts that we've got in the past? As we all know, Zack Snyder was a director who has gotten multiple chances to do multiple cuts of films in the past. What is it about him that has constantly allowed him to get this type of special treatment? And so, without further ado, in an emergency last-minute top 10 that I had to compose for the sake of how much online course this thing is getting, I have successfully narrowed down 10 reasons outside of all the mainstream popular reasons as to why Zack Snyder's Justice League, as it has now been titled, is better than Joss Whedon's. And there will be no honorable mentions, and of course there will be a lot of spoilers for this film covered. So if you have not seen this movie, all 4 hours of it, turn this video off, go click on HBO Max and watch the movie, and then come back and give this video a click. But if you've seen it already, then get ready. Here are my top 10 reasons why the Snyder Cut is better than Justice League. Actual villains that are characters. Okay, the first major thing I noticed that told me I was in for a different kind of ride. The villains are not only actually kind of compelling, but also pretty cool. With the original cut, DC and Warner were so clearly intent on replicating the first Avengers movie that they just kind of completely forgot that part of what made that first Avengers movie so special was how awesome of a villain Loki was. With Snyder back at the helm, he gets to explore everything that was missing with Steppenwolf as a character from the original, bringing back his original design and getting more into Steppenwolf's motivations, his relationship with Darkseid, the political situation of Apocalypse, and all different sorts of things that he had planned that were eventually going to build into his Justice League sequels. Villains are something that have become kind of hit or miss recently, which is a shame because villains, or as they're more commonly referred to in the literary sense, antagonists, are such a crucial part of good and interesting storytelling, which is a shame considering how few good ones we get nowadays. So not only did we get a gigantic, entirely CG villain whose entire look had been reformatted to more so suit the character, with a voice actor that's actually properly utilized this time to capture the character's simultaneous menace and tenacity and pitiful nature, with an interesting backstory and connection to other equally menacing villains. But we also actually got that with some character. Kieran Hines is such an underrated actor, but he has such a great tone and tenacity when he's actually put to a project that is well utilized. I love those types of projects where you get to see character actors like this mixed with such big superstars and icons like this, which made it so beyond disappointing when we saw him wasted on that god-awful looking World of Warcraft design that Whedon picked for the initial film. But to top things off, Snyder doesn't fall into that easy trap and proves once again that he's really one of the only directors that can actually give some interesting character to not only one but multiple CGI coded villains in this movie. He was able to not only make Steppenwolf, the Loki character, interesting, but he was even able to give Darkseid, the Thanos character of his version, even more character and interest in this movie with only a few scenes. Not only that, but also actually managed to separate him enough from Thanos with only a few limited scenes. It really is something that I do have to give credit for, especially when even with the company that we love, Marvel has disappointed us so many times with the villains that they have portrayed. It feels like a director's vision actually coming to life. I know, it's the most pretentious, hacky thing to say when it comes to popular movies today. It's the whole thing that internet crybabies think dictates still how actually movies are made, and it annoys me. But why I have to give special props here is because this is the first time since, I would say, James Gunn's original Guardians of the Galaxy, where a studio-made, gigantically budgeted superhero movie actually feels like it was the singular vision of one person, not a set of corporate figureheads. It's a tremendous part of the movie's marketing that it would be Snyder's vision, but I guess I find it surprising that they actually stuck to that, considering just how cynical I've become with just anything having to do with modern day movie marketing. And the biggest surprise easily is after watching the movie was just how uniquely original this felt for a director's vision in a long time. I can feel Snyder pulsating through every single frame of this in a way I really haven't seen even since before Guardians of the Galaxy. I would say going back to Watchmen. It's just something having to do with the visual flair where you could tell when somebody has direct autonomy over each and every single scene, as opposed to something that feels more fleshed out and pumped through a studio system in order to make it more palatable for a widespread audience. We talk about the idea of directors having autonomy in Hollywood, but what do the majority of us actually know what that means? We're a bunch of people attempting to make money via advertisements through tech giants. We have no idea how decisions in Hollywood are made. But that's also what makes moments like these so special. We champion people all the time for propping up the age-old standards that Hollywood perpetuates, but somebody that breaks the mold, it's so rare so much of the time. And when it does happen, the narrative is always pushed to seemingly go negatively for them, which is why we have to go out of our way when not only can something like this break through the mold, but it's positively received. It actually feels like a different movie than the original. So the truth about director's cuts is that very rarely do they actually add more to the original cut. Most of the time, it's simply the director's ego of wanting to see some scenes that they really enjoyed, that they felt truly added more to the story of the movie, that usually got cut for time, but very rarely do they actually contribute to a different cut of the movie that actually changes the plot. I think the only other major example of this that comes to mind is Ridley Scott's director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, which adds sequences, plot points, and characters that significantly alter the style, pace, and overall feel of the movie, to the point where critics almost universally praise it as the better and more proper version of the film. As I stated in my opening, most director's cuts are simply the same movie we got before, just with a few extra deleted scenes. I'm not saying these are bad, not at all. They just don't add a whole lot to me that I hadn't already gotten from the originals. But what we had here was something completely different. This was more than just a director attempting to make his version of the movie by adding a few extra scenes that were cut for time. This is a director going in and vastly changing the original movie that we got, so much so that it feels much more so suited to their vision. It goes so much further than just added scenes. I'm talking visuals, sound, color grading, entire experiences, character moments that just create for such a vastly different version of the film. It's something that I can't say I've experienced with really any other director's cuts or really films before. It's completely unexpected. I made a statement prior to the release of this film that I would only give it a fair review if I actually got a complete and totally different film experience of what I got the first time, which is something Batman vs. Superman, the extended edition, did not deliver for me. But probably for the first time in a very long time, not only this, but a DC film actually delivered on my expectations. The sense of scale is so much bigger. Scale is something that, let's face it, a lot of movies now just don't have. Mostly because gigantic scale usually means a lot more money for whichever studio is investing in said movie. Whether it be for extra CG effects, more props, costumes, sets, it all depends on what the story is. It's a term that can even be applied to Oscar bait movies, with David Fincher's most recent period piece, Mank, having a scale that really hasn't been applied to most Hollywood movies in quite a while. As successful a filmmaker as he is, the one thing I can't deny about Snyder is that the man has a sense of scale that is unrivaled by few others. I hated Batman vs. Superman, but goddamn does that movie feel big. And while Justice League 2017 felt little and fun and cutesy and lighthearted, this movie felt so goddamn big, and not just because of the length. The sense of scale right from the opening shot felt like the biggest thing ever, and I actually think that Snyder does a very good job with visually stating how Superman's death triggered these universe-bending stakes that trigger a whole alien invasion of Earth. We've become so desensitized to alien invasions and other gigantic grandstanding events because of the previous decade of big-budget CG-filled visual flair, and a really big-budget spectacle of any kind has really been made easy, particularly because of Marvel's application to it. But when you take somebody like Snyder, somebody who's been able to apply a visual style of something like 300 to the DC properties in a way that has truly altered the way the comic book properties can be viewed, it does add a sense of scale that feels like it's been missing from superhero cinema and really just cinema for the last couple of years. These are larger-than-life characters after all, and while Marvel has done a very, very good job of portraying them as down-to-earth people, they are at the end of the day supposed to feel grand and epic. So it's nice to see that somebody can still remember that these guys are originally supposed to be the modern-day versions of Greek gods and can therefore apply them and portray them as such. Not as much forced humor, more naturalistic dialogue. Another term that's been bastardized by the internet. Remember when movies could actually just, have regular bits of human humor that actually didn't feel forced or written by a joke panel? Among many other things that changed about the modern day film industry, besides revolutionizing the action genre, Marvel also kind of killed the comedy genre by basically becoming these one-liner filled superhero pundits that always had to be self-aware about themselves. So naturally, in the never-ending attempt at ripping them off, Warner, when they brought on the director of the first Avengers movie, wanted to make the movie feel funnier in order to distance itself from the Snyder seemingly gloom-filled past. So Whedon, of course, included a ton of bits that he thought felt funny, most of which just consisted of Ezra Miller saying some really terrible, awful, cringy one-liners and mugging for the camera. What surprised me the most about the Snyder Cut was not only necessarily how funny it was, but just how lighthearted it was. There are a surprising amount of human moments in this movie. Snyder's developed a reputation in recent years for his film being kind of grim and almost emo feeling, so you can imagine my surprise when there are a surprising amount of genuine human moments to be found here. The interesting thing that he pulls off is that because he makes the stakes feel so big, it's difficult to think of because most of the time in recent cinema, the characters usually just shrug it off and just go along with it. But here, the characters actually feel like they're having a genuine reaction to what could seemingly be the end of the world. Batman and Flash actually develop a rapport. Batman is actually legitimately happy when he sees that Flash wants to team up with them, and Ezra Miller actually has a chance to, act and play a character rather than just fulfill the role of comic relief, as well as Ben Affleck finally actually get to express some of the joys that he felt several years ago when he was first cast as Batman. In addition, there's a wonderful scene during which they're exhuming Superman's body where Aquaman and Wonder Woman have this incredible moment where they're actually getting to bond due to the fact that members of their respective races haven't actually interacted in the last 100 years since Darkseid's initial invasion. Even the moments between Superman and Lois Lane after he comes back to life, which were also probably my favorite parts of the theatrical cut, even those feel more fleshed out, as the moments leading up to Superman and Lois's reunification in this film feel much more naturalistic, and they also feel much more naturalistic and emotionally vindicated this time around. It's one of the few times in which the extra time that is put in to justify the amount of time that these characters take up on screen is actually very, very well justified. The visuals are so much cooler. Look, Snyder's always been a guy known for his rich visual palette. Guardians of Ga'Hoole, Watchmen, and 300 are all so visually insane, so much more than they need to be, unlike any other movies at the time they were released. And even though Sucker Punch is absolutely stupid in its premise and really is not that good of a movie, you cannot tell me that there is any other movie that has the visual look of it. And even I have to admit, the visuals in the Whedon cut were bad. They were really, really, really bad. Like, every time I look at that movie and I see what happens with Steppenwolf, and especially compared to this movie, it's bad. Look, every time a movie undergoes reshoots, especially to that extent, it's always one of two things that suffers: the visuals or the third act. And in this case, it was the visuals. I mean, just look at what they did with Steppenwolf in between both versions. It's not even a comparison. With his cut, though, in addition to the looks just applied to the apocalyptic character, Snyder takes advantage in order to bring his signature visual palette and slow-mo style shooting back to the film. And even though the slow-mo, as always, is extremely excessive, goddamn, is this movie one of the most visually brilliant and interesting movies I've seen in a long time. It's not so much how realistic it looks, quite the opposite, in fact, but it's rather how he uses the visuals in order to tell the story and actually make it look comic accurate. I do love the Marvel films, but I'll be the first person to admit their visual style kind of sucks. Their attempts to make everything look washed out and down to earth as possible kind of saps the comic book aura that these characters have generated for decades, making a majority of their films look kind of boring. Snyder is a guy known for his visual palette, and he's a guy that understands that these, again, are not supposed to be realistic, down to earth figures. These are larger than life, essentially godlike figures. And not only can he make them look as cool as possible, but he can also apply that look to alien creatures. Again, a sci-fi and fantasy staple that we have become so used to, and can still make them look malicious as possible and visually interesting in a way that really no other movie right now is doing. It actually gives its characters room to breathe. Now, granted, 4 hours is a lot of time to take up. And it's not 1962, when Lawrence of Arabia, clocking in at roughly 4 hours, is the only thing in theaters so everyone could go and see it. Ever since the initial release of the film in 2017 and the beginning of the Snyder Cut movement, one of the biggest criticisms that came out was that the supporting characters whose first appearance was this movie did not get enough time to properly matriculate and really see their arcs through to completion. I don't personally feel that this was the case, because I absolutely understood everyone's arc throughout that first movie. But at the same time, I did understand understand everyone's vitriol, especially after seeing how the characters were displayed here. The characters of the Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman are all given pretty extensive and thorough arcs and reasons for wanting to get into the fight, with some extremely enriching backstories, motivations, and chances to display their powers. Even Wonder Woman and Superman, characters whose arcs and scenes changed relatively little from the initial film, felt more fleshed out and less retcon. One thing I did notice heavily in the initial film was how much the character of Superman seemed retconned to be more fun, poppy, and flashy, with more funny one-liners when he came back to life. It's one thing when you have a film this long just to take up time and for the sake of showing off more flashy visuals or certain scenes that the director desperately wanted in that initially got cut for time, but this one really does feel like it's made to serve the characters the extra time that's needed. It's the one area where I don't necessarily know if the cut actually did do it better, because I do still think that I got everything I needed to know about these characters from the initial cut. The whole magic of movies is the idea that you can get so much seemingly from just an impression of a character. However, taking my feelings of the initial film aside, I do feel like I did understand the characters' motivations here a little bit better. I understood Batman's motivations for wanting to get the team together, Wonder Woman's sense of isolation and attempt to replicate the family she left behind, Flash's insecurity toward wanting to achieve something above his perceived social class, Cyborg feeling disconnected from reality because of his changed physical state, Aquaman's isolation from his home, and of course, Superman being brought back to life to a seemingly very changed world in a relatively short amount of time. I'm not usually one that thinks that extra time is needed, because again, the whole magic of movies is the idea of leaving an impression on you. The idea that you don't actually spend that much time in order to really get to know these characters as people, but you still leave the experience feeling like you do. However, I'm also open to exceptions, and with characters that are as big as these, some extra time is always warranted and earned. It's different than any superhero movie we've really gotten. Now, here's one that will have everyone's head spinning. This movie actually feels like a unique superhero story. Certainly not in the sense of what the story consists of. That's the same MacGuffin storyline that people have been seeing in movies for almost 100 years of cinema. But think about it, this is a superhero story that's being given the same kind of treatment that something like The Godfather or Lawrence of Arabia or even something as recent as The Irishman has been given. Even the most epic Marvel movie has never gotten this kind of treatment. Granted, in the last couple of years, we've gotten our fair share of epic and crazy different superhero stories. The superhero movement, I will call it, has certainly gone the way of the Western. As the great Steven Spielberg has said, it's undergone each and every single different type of story treatment, deconstruction, and everything else at this point, which makes it so much more satisfying when something can come out that still seeks to surprise and challenge the typical viewer of this type of story. A 4-hour-long epic that so could have easily been a 5-episode miniseries, but that was released as a singular product, with the visual look and feel of 300, the tone of some of the darkest comics ever made, marketed for a mainstream audience, featuring some of the most popular characters of the last 80 years. It's hard to think that a character like Batman could be featured in something like the corny 60s TV series as well as something like this, but that's just the wonder of comic book storytelling. When it comes to something like originality in modern-day storytelling, a medium that has largely been successful for telling the same type of stories over and over for decades on end, it makes it even more impressive when something this big and this epic can come along and still feel like it adds something new to that litany of stories. Cyborg. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. In the last couple of months leading up to the release of the Snyder Cut, Cyborg actor Ray Fisher went online and made a series of tweets accusing both Warner Brothers and replacement director Joss Whedon of racially discriminating against him due to how his character, Victor Stone, was utilized in the film. This tweet eventually led to a string of tweets from former Buffy the Vampire alumni accusing Whedon of harassment and other illicit behavior that effectively led to his removal from his upcoming HBO show The Nevers and other projects he was to be associated with going forward. Joss Whedon's behavior aside, however, what effect did this actually have on the movie and the character? Well, I've learned to take a lot of celebrity takes and thoughts with a grain of salt due to their vast sense of self-importance and how that actually affects the important real-world issues going on at hand. The one thing I understood immediately upon viewing the Snyder Cut was Fisher's ventilation with Warner and Whedon, because Cyborg is the motherfucking star of this movie. Do I think that anything was necessarily lost with the difference between the two cuts? Not really, but I do understand why his arc and contribution to the movie is so much more substantial in this version, and not just based on screen time. It's completely understandable why Ray Fisher was pissed at Whedon. Snyder's version sees the character not only playing a key point in the plot in solving the crisis at the end of the movie, but he gets an origin story of himself and is allowed to experience a series of major crises and some some very extremely depressing events, losing both of his parents over the course of the film, really actually undergoing the tortures of experiencing the new real-world body mixed with the apocalyptic technology, as well as having to learn how to form real human connections with people again. It's something that seemed only hinted at in the original cut, versus this time around, we actually really get inside the character's head, to the point where he really does almost get more screen time than the rest of the major characters that we've gotten to know at this point. He's a character with a tragic past and an interesting superhero career, one that has ended sadly multiple different times, but it was so nice to see him actually utilized in a way that actually had a major part, and I do hope certainly that it doesn't affect Ray Fisher's career going forward, because after seeing this, I do truly believe in his talent as an actor and that he does have legs to continue his career in Hollywood going forward. It's the first time in a long time where a creator has actually been championed by the studio system that failed him. Okay, the ultimate take, and this is from someone who had previously negatively reacted to most of Snyder's content, so I feel like what I'm about to say here has extra weight. In a capitulative statement to everything that I've just said here, I personally don't feel that Zack Snyder is a great filmmaker. In fact, I don't even know if he's a good one. The man knows how to compose a shot unlike any other, and his sense of visual storytelling with the use of digital effects is rivaled by no other. But his actual storytelling abilities in the past have varied from either sort of enjoyable to barely passable. But the one defining thing, the one aspect of this 4-hour-long superhero epic that separates it from all else, the thing that makes all of these other reasons that I have just stated relevant, is because this is the first time in a very long time that an individual filmmaker has been propped up and allowed to make up for the studio system that previously failed. Zack Snyder as a director has had such an interesting career, from making his mark by directing a remake of a 70s cult hit, to partaking in the cult hit comic book subgenre of the late 2000s, to ultimately defining it with his adaptation of Watchmen, and then becoming DC's first attempt at the Kevin Feige imitator in the early 2010s. He departed Justice League after already having an interesting experience with Warner Brothers after the whole Batman vs. Superman debacle, and then departing in order to grieve for his adopted daughter Autumn after she committed suicide. Despite Joss Whedon's attempt at making a film in a very short amount of time based off of an artist who had such a polar opposite take than himself, for a studio that simply wanted a working product that could satisfy audiences within that said short period of time, of course could not deliver. The number one reason why the Snyder Cut of Justice League is so satisfying is because for what feels like the first time in a very long time, a studio actually put aside their focus on only putting out a product in order to satisfy as many people as possible, and for once decided to do right by an individual. Yes, they got something out of it, of course, based on just how many subscribers they got in this one weekend for their HBO Max app. But at the end of the day, Zack Snyder got to return to finish a project that he devoted almost a decade of his life to, and finish it in a way that only he could have seen fit. No overseeing, no limits, no time cuts, no nothing. Just Justice League the original way that he wanted to make it. All the visual flair, all the important juicy character moments, all the grandstanding, the nightmarish visuals, all of it. It's the first time in a while that individual artistry, something that has been talked about a lot, but something that really actually hasn't been witnessed a whole lot outside of a few individual efforts that never seem to get the attention that they need, actually triumphed in the age of corporatism. And in a time where that barely happens, it needs to be celebrated, because when the rare times that it does happen, it really is a joy to witness. And that was it, people. Those are my top 10 reasons why I personally felt that the Snyder Cut was better than Justice League 2017. I know this is an issue that everyone is weighing in on, so please feel free to let me know whether you agree with me or disagree with me in the comment section below. Make sure you also click the like button and the subscribe button and the bell next to the subscribe button. That way you guys can get notified every time we put up a new video. We put up new content every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for your guys' viewing pleasure. We're recapping Falcon and Winter Soldier right now. We've got so much stuff planned for you guys for the future. If you could just click the subscribe button, you will be helping us tremendously and allowing us to grow so that we can continue to provide the right amount of content there is in this internet and still kind of weird pandemic lockdown age for you guys personally. Also, if you want to keep track of what we're doing and what we have scheduled for the future, you can follow us on our Instagram and Facebook pages at Talkin TV Podcast or at Talkin TV. As always, thank you people for tuning in once again. Make sure, remember, 12 seasons in a short film, and as always, watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.